Serial killer from France Marcel Petiot is unique in his own way, and many experts do not consider him a maniac. He committed the greatest number of murders during the occupation of France, Germany during the Second World War. The serial killer lured his victims to the house of death with promises to take out members of the resistance or Jews from France to more prosperous countries. At the same time, he presented himself as a doctor of Russian origin named Eugene. But instead of the promised corridor of salvation, those who trusted Dr. Eugene found death in the house of this very doctor. The town of Auxerre in France is currently famous for the fact that a football club from this city has never left the top division of the French Football League in its entire history. But few people know that it was in this city that the bloodiest serial killer in the history of France of the last centuries was born and lived. Marcel Petiot was born on January 17, 1897. Since childhood, he was a smart, but hooligan guy and was constantly expelled from schools. In March 1914, 17-year-old Petiot, for some unknown reason, he opened the mailbox and stole letters and postcards from there. When he was detained, he could not clearly explain why he did it. He was examined and a psychiatrist confirmed Marcel's mental illness. It happened on March 26, 1914. Thanks to this diagnosis, he managed to avoid responsibility, and soon he joined the army. He was officially drafted in January 1916. At that time there was the First World War, during which the Germans actively used gases. Petiot was lucky to be hit by a gas attack. After that, the future serial killer was commissioned. It was after he was hit by a gas attack that he began to notice inappropriate actions. Most likely, the German gas somehow affected the psyche of the future serial killer. Petiot returned to his hometown as an honored veteran. It was this status that allowed Petiot to enter the university on preferential terms and receive a medical education.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
On December 15, 1921, the future serial killer received a medical doctorate degree at the Faculty of Medicine in Paris. Immediately after receiving his diploma, he was sent to the small town of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. At the same time, Petiot became addicted to the use of prohibited substances and became addicted to them. All this required money. While working in Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, he began to conduct questionable medical practice, engage in drug trafficking, perform illegal abortions and simply rob some of his clients. In 1926, Petiot first came to the attention of the police as a possible suspect in the murder. In May of that year, Louise Delavaux, the daughter of Petiot's patient and his mistress, disappeared. But the police blamed the disappearance of Louise on the fact that, they say, the girl just ran away from home. Either the disappearance of Louise, or the active search that her father undertook, or the attention of the police, but something forced Petiot to return to Auxerre, where mayoral elections were held once. Marcel puts up his candidacy and wins. However, he does not leave medical practice. And it is from this side that the veteran mayor gets his first troubles. In 1929, Petiot's maid first became pregnant, and then disappeared. Marcel was married by that time and had a son. The city prosecutor suspected Petiot of involvement in the disappearance of the maid. An investigation began and the police found a former patient of the Dr. Mayer, who was ready to testify that Petiot is a natural sadist and likes to perform operations without anesthesia. But when the prosecutor was already preparing to hand over the materials to the prefect of the district, she died unexpectedly, as did the witness who testified on Petiot. The death certificate was signed by Marcel, who wrote that both died of natural causes. But by 1931, some rumors about the mayor's involvement in financial fraud and the death of some people had leaked to the prefect. Petiot had to leave the mayor's and move to Paris, where the serial killer got a pretty good job. In 1939, he filed a declaration stating that over the past year, the mayor earned more than 1 million francs. With the outbreak of World War II and the occupation of France, Petiot had a new income item. Now he was selling fake conclusions to those Frenchmen who were supposed to be taken to Germany. This did not happen in the same way as in many countries where the Germans took almost everyone who comes to hand. In France, everything was almost civilized and resembled an ordinary conscription. And in Germany, French workers lived better than others. But not everyone wanted to go there, so Petiot sold fake medical certificates to unwilling people. But the real serial killer turned around about a year to the 41st year. By that time, many Frenchmen had joined the resistance, and the Germans stopped standing on ceremony. Started mass arrests of Jews who were sent to concentration camps. Many had to hide or try to leave the country and go to a place where there was no smell of war. For example, to South America. It was there that Petiot proposed to transport those who wanted to leave occupied France. But he had no safe route, as he told his victims. However, many believed Petiot sold real estate, bought currency and gold from speculators. After that, they were sent to a pre-specified address, which was communicated to them under great secrecy and with the requirement not to tell anyone. It was only in 1944 that it became clear that refugees came to the house 21 on Rue Lézard Street. This detached house, serial killer Petiot acquired back in early 1939, after which he made serious changes. In particular, he made a secret room, which he decorated with soundproof material. There were 2 exits from that room, one of which led to the garage. There Petiot dug a large hole and filled it with quicklime. It was there that the serial killer placed the corpses, and after most of the liquid from the bodies was sucked out by lime, he butchered them. For some time, the criminal threw the remains of the victims into the Seine and into wastelands. But very soon a curfew was declared in Paris and it became dangerous to appear on the street at night, so getting rid of the remains became difficult. But Petiot could not stop. In 1943, a serial killer, despite being very careful, attracted the attention of the Gestapo. The German secret police have received information that the doctor may be involved in the flight of Jews and members of the resistance from France to the intermediary who supplied Petiot's clients. But he did not know about their future fate. A certain Ivan Dreyfus, who was a secret agent of the Gestapo, was sent. He was sent without cover. He only managed to say that he had indeed made an agreement with Marcel Petiot, who promised to send him to South America. And then he disappeared. Without waiting for any news from Dreyfus, on May 22, 1943, the Germans arrested both Petiot and the mediator. Dreyfus' remains would not be discovered until a year later, and in the meantime Petiot was being interrogated about his ties to the resistance. But he couldn't tell me anything useful, since there are no connections with the underground. After 2 months of interrogations, Petiot was given up and sent to the Frasnes military prison, from where he was unexpectedly released in February 1944. It is still not known for certain why the Germans decided to release Petiot. The most likely version is that someone from the French, who collaborated with the Germans, was interested in the house on Rue Lézard. Most likely, Petiot agreed to sell the property for a song, and the serial killer was released in order to prepare the house for sale and issue the necessary documents. After leaving prison, the serial killer Petiot first bought 300 kilograms of coal. And a week later, on March 11, 1944, residents of Rue Lézard Street complained to the police about the constant stench and smoke, which comes from House 21. Despite the fact that the battle was just coming to the finish line, the police in Paris continued to function. The police tried to reach the owners of the house for a long time, but no one opened it to them. And the smoke continued to fly out of the chimney and spread around. It was decided to crack the door and establish its source. The house was heated by its own boiler room located in the basement. Going down there, the police found many remains of human bodies. The stove was burning, several parts were lying nearby. And a little to the side, a lime pit was discovered, in which more bodies were lying. Police experts found the remains of at least 26 people in a house on Rue Lézard. The work of the experts was in full swing when Marcel Petiot rode up to the house on a bicycle. One of the neighbors identified him as the owner of the house and told the police about it. 2 patrolmen standing in the cordon approached him and tried to detain him until the circumstances were clarified. But Petiot brazenly declared, I am a member of the resistance. Do not interfere in anything, I executed traitors on the instructions of the leadership. After this statement, the killer got on his bike and quietly drove away. The dumbfounded policemen did not even try to detain him. If they knew the results of the preliminary expert opinion, it is quite possible that Petiot would have been detained. And criminologists have already suggested that the owner of the house is none other than a serial killer named Surgeon, who operated in Paris from 1941 to 1943. It was then that the police quite often found parts of people. Moreover, they were butchered very professionally, for which the police called the killer a surgeon. The identity of the owner of the house was established quickly. They also found out that Petiot has a 5-room apartment near Rue Lézard. Of course, he wasn't there. But the police continued investigation and soon dug up quite a lot of evidence on Petiot, proving his involvement in at least 27 murders. Although various documents belonging to 71 people, including children, were found in the house on Rue Lézard. Inspector Massieu, who was involved in this case, he wanted the serial killer to be arrested. His search was taken seriously. Already on March 13, 1944, his wife, son and brother Maurice were detained. All three were interrogated for a long time, trying to get information about Marcel from them. But in June 1944, the troops of the anti-Hitler coalition landed in Normandy and everyone was not up to Petiot. After the liberation of Paris, Massieu and the entire criminal police were in prison and were accused of aiding the Germans. It is quite possible that the Petiot case would not have been remembered if the killer hadn't reminded himself. In the autumn of 1944, the criminal began to send letters to Paris newspapers in which he claimed that he was an active participant in the resistance and suffered as a result of the provocation of the Gestapo. They say that it was the Germans who planted several dozen corpses in his house in order to compromise him in front of other underground workers. The letters attracted attention and reminded of the March events. It was now in the interests of the French resistance to sort out the bodies on the Rue Lézard. Moreover, Petiot never showed up to the authorities, and it was suspicious. A new investigation was entrusted to Commissioner Pinault. The detective carefully studied the police reports on the March events, the further actions of the police, and even visited Georges Massieu in prison. Soon the detective is almost. I had no doubt that Petiot was at least involved in the murders. But the question remained unclear: was Petiot really a member of the underground? During the war, the underground groups were very disunited and almost did not intersect with each other. But no matter how hard the police tried to find at least someone who knew the underground Petiot, they failed. And soon Marcel's brother, Maurice Petiot, was detained. As it followed from the police reports of the previous regime, he helped his brother to cover his tracks. Maurice was interrogated with passion. And he soon told that indeed, at the request of his brother, he took some suitcases to various addresses. After going through these addresses, the police found things belonging to more than 70 different people there. It became clear that the serial killer Petiot did not help anyone to get out of France, but simply killed and robbed people who trusted him. Petiot himself was arrested on October 31, 1944. It happened quite casually and almost by accident. Petiot's portraits were hung in all public places, issued to police officers and paramilitary police officers. One of the agents, Charles Danier, identified the commuter trains at the station, a man very similar to the wanted man. He came up and demanded documents. He presented a certificate in the name of counterintelligence Captain Henri Valery Waterwald. But he behaved very nervously, and he was transported to the nearest police station. Ironically, Charles Danier himself was hiding from the law, since during the occupation he collaborated with the Germans. After Petiot's arrest, Charles Danier went on the run. The detainee tried to shake his rights, yelled that he was a veteran of the resistance, a responsible intelligence officer. But when fake documents with his photo, but with different names, began to be extracted from his wallet, he quickly shut up. And 2 days later, his wife identified the detainee as Marcel Petiot. At first, he still tried to roam, to say that he executed traitors, and even named a couple of people who really collaborated with the Germans. But by that time, the police had managed to identify 27 people whose remains were found on Rue Lézard, and most of them have never cooperated with the attackers. So when Petiot was charged with mass murder, he stopped pumping his license and began to answer some questions. In particular, he told about the method of killing victims. When those wishing to leave France found themselves at 21 Rue Lézard, a serial killer led them into a secret room, where he offered coffee, seasoned with sleeping pills in advance. And only after that, as the victims fell asleep, I injected them with poison, the most frequently used curare. And if the victims refused coffee, he insisted on vaccinating them. No one refused, trusting the doctor. Serial killer Marcel Petiot appeared in court on March 19, 1946. He was found guilty of 26 murders and sentenced to death. The execution of the criminal was postponed several times due to a malfunction of the execution machine. On May 25, 1946, a mobile guillotine was delivered to the prison at night, and a few hours later the sentence was carried out. But the questions remained. Firstly, Petiot did not say exactly how many people he killed. Some later claimed that this figure could go beyond 200 people. And secondly, the money and the valuables that the refugees took with them to a foreign land and which he appropriated were never found. Serial killer. Some of them had cash in the amount of a couple $1 million and jewelry for the same amount. The valuables were never found. And most likely they will no longer be found, as the true number of victims who found their death in the House of Death on Rue Lézard remains a mystery.